This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Co-founder and executive director of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation, Deborah Watts, on this edition of Conversations. Deborah Watts is a published author who has worked in corporate America, founded her own business, and ventured into politics. There's no doubt she brings passion to her pursuits, but perhaps her most enduring accomplishment will be her role as co-founder and executive director of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. Till's tragic murder is considered by many as the spark that ignited the modern-day civil rights movement. Watts' leadership and dedication has earned her prestigious accolades, including being one of Essence Magazine's Woke 100 Women of 2017. We welcome Deborah Watts to this edition of Conversations. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. Let me get you to tell the story of Emmett Till.
Well, yes, Emmett, 14, traveled from Chicago, Illinois, to Mississippi to visit relatives in 1955. His mother, and he were both close with each other, and it was a difficult thing for her to send him off. But she was sending him off as many folks that lived in the North would send their relatives' children and grandchildren south because that's where they migrated from. And so it was important to have that kind of family connection. And so she relented and allowed him to go. Emmett, with my cousins, other cousins, and I should mention that our great-grandfathers were brothers.
Okay.
So Emmett is a cousin of mine and grew to be close with his mother and grandmother. But on that faithful journey, and he had a chance to go to the Bryant grocery store there in Money, Mississippi. Traveled there with some of our other cousins. And while in the store, he had an encounter with Carolyn Bryant, who's the store owner. Co-owner, and at the end, he bought candy and other items, and as she was exiting the store, he whistled at her, which was a fateful thing for him. A few days later, Emmett was taken out of his bed. He was kidnapped in the middle of the night and taken from the home by Carolyn's husband, Roy Bryant, and Milam, J.W. Milam. Never forget those names, but J.W. Milam. And they took him on a 30-mile journey, of which, we've had a chance to go on that fateful journey that Emmett was on. But they beat him, they shot him, they lynched him. And all of this was because of him whistling at Carolyn, but also because of the stories that were told to Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam about what Emmett had done. And I don't know if you're familiar with what's been happening recently, but Carolyn Bryant has, of course, said that Emmett didn't do any of those things that he accused her, or that she accused him of doing.
Because the story went that she said that he did a lot more than just whistle at her.
Exactly. That he approached her, he touched her, and said other, remarks to her that, of course, would have been, those things that would have been against, the rules, if you will, and any young man, doing that. But it was 14, a vibrant young man, and of course, as a young man traveling from Chicago, he had a lot of dreams and a lot of hopes, and had encounters with people like Carolyn, so it was nothing that was unusual, for him. But as he was, once he was kidnapped and lynched and murdered and thrown into the Tallahatchie River, they had tied a 75-pound cotton gin fan around his neck and threw him in the river. And a few days later, his body, surfaced, and Roy Bryant and J.W. Milam were arrested. But I think the tragedy of all of this, too, Emmett's murder, of course, was horrific. But the trial took place about maybe 19 days or so after Emmett was murdered. Not a lot of time to do a lot of investigation. The murderers were acquitted. They were found not guilty. of his murder. And there was, of course, celebration in Mississippi. And his murder and the funeral that I think that happened afterwards, his mother made a decision to have an open casket funeral. Of course, his body had been in the water for a few days. He had been shot in the head. She decided to have an open casket funeral, which I think is what woke up America and woke up people around the world. Because Emmett was only 14. And with that horrific murder, the acquittal of the murderers, and then for them to tell their story later to Look magazine and to receive about $4,000 for their story. And in their story, they actually admitted to murdering Emmett and actually addressing those items that they felt were so offensive. And they were offensive in the sense that they wanted to send a message about the offense, that it would be tied to education. Like if they would allow Emmett to live, that black people and white people could go to school together and, would hopefully have relationships together. That's what they were trying to avoid. Okay. And then also with the voting rights at that time, people were, looking at voting rights. And they wanted to send a message that, if black people had an opportunity to vote, that they could control the country. So not only was his murder for the sake of Carolyn Bryant's virtue, it was also to send a message across the country and to African Americans across the country that these are things that we should not even think about doing. And so his murder meant and represented a lot at that time during Jim Crow for Mississippi, and then for all of those across the country and even in the world.
And when you talk about that open casket
Yes.
Funeral, and I saw some pictures, and like you say, that was a turning point when people realized this is serious business, huh? And I know you've spoken that you have so much admiration for his mother for doing that and having,
Yes.
I guess, the courage to do that. And I get the idea that you knew his mother quite well throughout your life. Is that right?
I did. Mamie Till-Mobley, Mamie Bradley at the time, Mamie Carthen, her maiden name, is my shero. I had an opportunity at the time when Mamie traveled across the country to speak to crowds, thousands, with the NAACP and others, to speak out against this horrific murder. This is her only son. And to talk about the injustice, to talk about civil rights, and to talk about trying to achieve justice for him. I mean, she wrote to presidents, she wrote to our Department of Justice to try to achieve justice for her son's murder. But I had an opportunity to see her speak. She came to Omaha, Nebraska, which is where I was born and raised. And I saw her at a podium, speaking in front of thousands of individuals. And this is 1955. I was a toddler at the time. But at that time, if you can imagine, African American women, were relegated to subservient kinds of jobs. And rarely did we see women standing at a podium, particularly someone at her age, speaking very bravely and with a lot of courage about expecting justice for her son's murder. And so I just admired her from that day on and had a relationship with her, as I grew older and could speak with her about that time, her courage and her expectations and her hopes and dreams, to still achieve justice. She fought for 47 years to try to get justice for Emmett's murder, never ever understanding what actually happened to him, and never achieving justice, not even, was not able to live long enough to have this case reopened, which the case was reopened a year after she passed. But yes, Mamie represents a lot. And I think for women, even today, they, think about her courage at that time. And on her birth date, which was just November 23rd, the day of, Thanksgiving, you will see, if you go on Instagram or some of the other social media networks, you'll see her picture, and you'll see people remembering her and remembering her courage. So not only for just myself, but for a lot of other women, she meant a lot.
Do you think during her lifetime she realized how important what she was doing was to the overall civil rights movement?
I think she recognized that, many times she was alone, as a woman, with other men and others. But, she did share the stage with Rosa Parks because, Rosa Parks, December 1st, decided and thought about Emmett at the time when she made her move, to sit so we could stand, if you will, along with people like Myrlie Evers, Medgar Evers' wife, along with Coretta Scott King and others who, after Emmett's murder, they experienced their own tragedies. And so she found herself on the stage with them throughout the years. And I think for all of them, I don't think they realized just the weight and how we revered them and the courage that they had to move forward, in life. But I think that because she was so passionate and, this is her son and there's no answers, there's no justice, I think it pushed her forward. So I think she felt that was her obligation, that was her cross to bear. She felt that her son's murder was a sacrifice, that he was a sacrificial lamb. And she stood on the platforms all across the world and all across the country, to speak out about him. And her passion has passed on to me and other, family members as well, because we want to see justice, and we're still seeking justice for Emmett.
We'll talk about the case being reopened.
Yes. Yes.
So it was reopened after she passed?
Yes, it was reopened in 2004. She passed in 2003, January 6, 2003. The case was reopened in 2004. They had to identify Emmett because during the trial, Roy Bryan and J.W. Milam had indicated that it wasn't Emmett, that they didn't, that it was a part of the defense, that how could you identify someone like that because his body was so mangled and, just the nature of a body being in the water for a couple of days. So that was part of their defense. So they had to exhume his body. And they did that in 2005. And that was the same year that we launched the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. But that led to reopening the case, and the investigation took place. There were some brave individuals that made sure, they worked closely with the FBI. People like Keith Beauchamp, my cousin Simeon Wright, who just passed this year, Wheeler Parker, along with, those are my cousins who were actually with Emmett at the time that he was kidnapped, along with Alvin Sykes, who's a justice, who's formed something called the Emmett Till Justice Campaign, fought really hard and worked with our Justice Department and others to make sure that case was reopened, and it was. They presented the evidence, and in 2007 they closed it without any indictments. So...
Well, and as I understand it, so Carolyn Bryant admitted later in her life that it was nonsense, that he did not do particularly all the physical or any kind of, had no physical, issues with her, right?
Right.
And so she admitted that. Now, is it my understanding, too, that she admitted that to someone writing a book?
Yes.
And then he held the information for an extended period of time? Is that...
Well, she admitted that to him back in 2007.
Okay.
And it was just disclosed early this year, well, in 2017, that she and her family approached him. He was at the University of North Carolina, I believe, and a historian there approached him and talked about a manuscript that she was writing at the time. And at that time, he began, I don't know if that's when he started writing this book, but he was aware of that back in 2007. His book came out earlier in 2017. And at that time, it's called, I believe it's called The Blood of Emmett Till. And there he discloses this, this interaction that he had with Carolyn and her family, what she said to him, that he didn't do any of the things that, that would warrant, the kind of I guess, brutality, that he received, and his death, actually. And also, she indicated that she would be, is putting together this manuscript that wouldn't be available until 2036. So Carolyn, who I believe is about 82 right now, 82, 83, I'm sure, this information it's important, to know what's in that manuscript.
Sure, sure.
Because I think the FBI has spoken to her a couple of times, and this information wasn't brought forth at that time. And I'm hoping that, her conscience, she wants to clear her conscience before she passes on, because, we deserve the truth, and we deserve to have her voice heard. There was never indictment, there was a warrant for her arrest. That was never done, and she had the luxury of speaking to, the authorities, without, being on trial, actually, at the time, in 1955. So there are a lot of things that happened back then that I think need to be corrected. I think the records need to be corrected. Many of the stories that are told about Emmett talk about, what Carolyn's recollection was at that time, which were wrong. And so the records need to be corrected. Emmett didn't do any of the things. He did whistle, and my cousins, Wheeler Parker and Simeon Wright, were there with him, and they have admitted that he did whistle.
But now I also read something that apparently he may have had some issues with stuttering or something, and that was the way he dealt with that, was whistling somehow to try to, is that accurate, or is that
Well,
hearsay?
that was, definitely Mamie. His mother knew that he had a speech impediment, and he stuttered, and she taught him to whistle when he was having trouble with a word. And it was her belief that that's what Emmett was doing at the time. So, as a mother who, knows her son and loves her son, of course, she was trying to justify and trying to find some kind of justification for this whistle. She believed that, about him. And that is actually in a book that she co-wrote with Chris Benson. So, but, she has every right to believe what she, believes. She deserved to have that in her memory. And but also she deserves justice, and that's what we're continuing to fight for.
Has anyone in your family reached out to Carolyn Bryant? Or tried to say, hey, will you come talk to us?
They're through their ways, yes, through authorities. I don't know that, I can't speak for Carolyn, but there is interest. I'd love to have a chance to talk with her and find out the truth. And I think some of our other relatives would as well, But there would definitely be interest in that. And I'm sure that there have been some attempts.
Interesting. Well, tell me about the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. What do you hope to accomplish with the foundation? What is its goal?
Yes. Well, Mamie Till-Mobley back in 1983 had an opportunity to speak to at the foundation or the formation of the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. And at that time, when she was writing her speech, she talked about the hope and dreams for boys and girls. And I even have a copy of what she said there, and that becomes our mission. If you don't mind,
please.
I could read it.
Oh, please do.
What Mamie said is that we cannot afford the luxury of self-pity. Our top priority now is to get on with the building process. My personal peace has come through helping boys and girls reach beyond the ordinary and strive for the extraordinary. We must teach our children to weather the hurricanes of life, pick up the pieces, and rebuild. We must impress upon our children that even when troubles rise 7.1 on life's Richter scale, though they sway, when troubles rise 7.1 on life's Richter scale, they must be anchored so deeply that though they sway, they will not topple. And in fact, she said this November 5th, 1989. I think I said 1983 earlier. And so that becomes our mission. And through that, we have created our goals. And our goals are to provide an opportunity for young people, and from an educational perspective. Number one, so that they're aware of what Emmett meant to our country and to our world, and the work of Mamie Till-Mobley. That's one of the things that we want to try to do. We have created an educational foundation where we take Emmett's story all across the country and we share what happened to Emmett, the kind of environment that was created back then, which was Jim Crow, and then also things that have transpired since then on this justice journey, and then also the people that have been involved and how they've been inspired by Emmett's legacy, Emmett's story, and what they've done in terms of writing books, creating storylines, movies, running for office, some of us, and then also making sure that we create this legacy of hope. And that's basically, I think, what Mamie was trying to do. And that means that you understand the truth of what happened, but then you move forward. You move forward, with courage, and you move forward with intention to make sure that the lives of young people, the lives of women and their families are better than they were when they began. And so we've created the Power of History, Turning Tragedy into Triumph, which is one of our legacy programs, along with Loving from the Inside Out, which is a women's empowerment symposium. And we honor Mamie Till-Mobley and her courage and the courage of other women that have exhibited that same kind of courage that Mamie did back in 1955. We also have a pledge that we've created, a covenant that young people have created it, called Never Again. And this Never Again pledge, and I believe I have shared a copy of the card with you, where we've asked them what were they willing to stand up for and what are they willing to stand against, which is what Mamie always tried to encourage with young people. And they came up with this pledge, and they came up with that image there. They selected it, and they came up with the pledge as well. I don't know if you want to read that, or
James
I could
can
read
get
it
a shot of it or not.
Okay.
But yes, it's racism, hatred, injustice, crimes against our youth.
Never again.
Never again.
And it was adopted from our Jewish community, with the Holocaust, which is such a powerful message, and one that we figured, why reinvent the wheel? They adopted it, they loved it, and they created the pledge on the back, which, it's a covenant, and they want the world, to participate. And that's, I pledge to never again to allow the ugly parts of our past history to become the present. I will forever stand up against racism, hatred, injustice, and crimes against our youth, and I will always stand up for peace, justice, and equality for all. Never again. And so we take that message along with a documentary that we show called Who Killed Emmett Till, to inspire young people, not only just to talk about the death and the tragedy that happened, but to inspire them to move forward in their lives and to have this kind of covenant with each other, so that when they're out in the world as adults and as children, that they will understand their responsibility. And they'll understand what happened back then, so that we don't have a repeat of what's happening, or have a repeat of what happened back then, what could happen even today.
This is anecdotally speaking from my perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, add to it. I see I have a young daughter, and I see that her and her friends and people older than her and whatnot, they don't seem to see color. They just see people as people. Am I accurate? Are things changing? Is the younger generation, do they get it?
Well, they have a level of acceptance, which is admirable in some instances. But what they're missing is a piece of history. And not that that should sway or change their attitude in terms of a level of acceptance, but I think if they, when they move forward in life, and when there are challenges, when there's competition, and when there's the kind of environment that we're in today, we have a polarizing environment
Extremely
politically.
Sure.
They don't get that either. And so I think we have an obligation to help bridge that gap for them. And that's part of what the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation is doing, is bridging the gap and building this bridge from the past to the present and future. I think they're missing that piece. I think they're missing the past piece. But I do applaud them, for moving forward and building relationships. But somewhere along the line, when it becomes adult on adult, when it becomes, competitive, when it becomes where there's an opportunity, things start to change. And I think if we all are on the same level playing field and understand historically what happened back then I think if we're all on the same playing field, we won't allow that to happen and to move forward into our adult lives. So I think along with myself, I have an obligation to make sure my grandchildren and my children who are teaching their children, they understand how important it is to build that bridge from the past to the present and the future. But I do applaud the young people. I mean, they came up with, that pledge, that vision. We, of course, had a different view of what the image should look like. They created that, and so I applaud them for doing it. But I think we should not leave our responsibility on the table when they're, building these relationships at such a young age. Right. As they move forward in life, things do change.
Sure.
So I think we need to stay woke, if you will, and make sure that they are as well.
Yeah. If someone wants to learn more about or perhaps get involved with the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation, how do they go about doing so?
Well, we have a website, which is EmmettTillLegacyFoundation.com. We are on social media with Instagram at Emmett Till Legacy Foundation, along with Facebook and Twitter. Okay. Our Twitter handle is at Emmett Till, and our Facebook is Emmett Till Legacy Foundation.
Wonderful.
So we're there. We welcome invites. We're right now on a tour. And we're touring with Who Killed Emmett Till. And so we're invited into churches, into colleges, universities, and corporate environments to have these discussions, to open discussion, along with challenging, the audience, to think about what kind of future we want going forward. How do we want our young people to be, going forward? And so with that, we make sure that they understand what happened in the past so it doesn't happen in the future. They use Emmett's story as a good way to gauge, that. Right.
What a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Deborah Watts, and she is the co-founder and executive director of the Emmett Till Legacy Foundation. And as she mentioned, you can find out more information on social media. By the way, you can see more of our conversations online at WSRE.org/conversations, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take wonderful care of yourself. We'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by Gulf Power, a Southern company, and by viewers like you. Thank you.